For those of you that do not know me, my name is Kyle Hart. I am the program manager for the Mid-Atlantic region of the National Park Conservation Association, NPCA. Very quickly about NPCA. NPCA is a membership-based organization. We have 1.7 million members and supporters nationwide, and we are very, very against the Prince William Digital Gateway. This project, I think goes without saying, is possibly the biggest threat to a national park that the state of Virginia and arguably this region has ever seen. Nothing compares in size, scope, and proximity to a park that we have ever seen. I think I've said this time and time again, but I'll say it again. The Digital Gateway is the equivalent of building 150 Walmart supercenters, 4 Pentagons. It has major implications for regional water quality, for national park visitor experience, and for the health of Prince William County as a whole. We're excited to be here today with some of our awesome coalition partners, and I obviously thank all of y'all for coming out on a Saturday afternoon. I am briefly just going to sort of ramble for a second and say that, the program we're going to hear from today sort of highlights the importance of both the battlefield and this corridor and this region as a whole, and what it means to our country. Arguably, this area sort of epitomizes the American struggle for, as our founding fathers put it, the journey for a more perfect union. This country has had a lot of struggles. We've done a lot of very bad things over the years. I think that goes without saying. And sort of the struggle to be, as a nation, what we sort of envisioned all those years ago when the founders, sort of wrote our founding documents, that struggle sort of is epitomized along the Pageland Lane corridor. It's two Civil War battles where literally the soul of our nation was fought over. It was the historic settlement. It was the slave community that became the freed community. It was Jenny Dean and her efforts to educate freed slaves and African Americans along the Prince William corridor, or the Pageland corridor in Prince William County, and it has been, much more to that over the years. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Christy Foreman, who works for the Manassas Battlefield Trust, and Christy is going to talk a little bit about the history of the battlefield and what that means for us today.
June 13th, 1865. 500 visitors make a pilgrimage from Washington, D.C. to the battlefield. Over the past months, the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery had been passed by Congress, followed by the Confederate surrender at Appomattox and the assassination of President Lincoln. On their journey, the travelers noted that the landscape was one wide area of desolation. The whole face of the country is changed. The group had come to dedicate some of the first monuments placed on a battlefield of the Civil War. The 2 crude obelisks, the Bull Run Monument on Henry Hill and the Groveton Monument along the unfinished railroad, which is just along the ridge behind us, had recently been constructed by Union soldiers still under arms. They had scavenged stone from the unfinished railroad and cut the stones with their camp tools. As they worked, they buried their dead, the bones of whom still lay exposed years later, and collected artillery shells from the battlefield to decorate the monuments. The inscriptions found on these monuments are simple, in memory of the patriots who fell at Bull Run and who fell at Groveton, respectively. But the dedication song, written by noted abolitionist and poet John Pierpont and sung by the attendees, makes their sentiments quite clear. Here on Virginia's sacred soil, where slavery bred and drove her gangs, the horrid serpent lay in coil. Here freedom's sons first felt her fangs. They fought, they fell, but not in vain. Lost they the battle of Bull Run. The blows that broke the bondman's chain at last were on this ground begun. Slavery may whet her cutthroat's knife or ram down her assassin's ball. The martyr may lay down his life. Seward may bleed and Lincoln fall. But freedom's arm is stronger yet, lifted in earnest for her sons. than is the traitor's bayonet, the murderer's knife, the pirate's guns. And so upon the bloody spot where now this monument is raised, shall rebel bones and memories rot, but patriots' names for aye be praised. These Union soldiers, now at the end of their journey, wanted to leave a testament to the significance of what had happened on this hallowed ground. The blows that broke the bondman's chain at last were on this ground begun. The shots fired here at Manassas irrevocably changed the course of American history, paving the way for freedom for all of her people. With their jobs complete, the soldiers and visitors headed home to rebuild their lives after the war. But the thing about a battlefield is that while the fighting only lasts for hours or days, the reverberations of the triumph and tragedy it brings to a community stretch for generations. Before and after those 4 days in 1861 and 1862, this place was home to the communities that surrounded us. Rich and poor, men and women, black and white, war and freedom, and a desolated landscape were more than lofty sentiments in moving song lyrics to the people of Prince William County. There were pillaged homes and crop fields that couldn't be farmed for the burial pits and stray shells. There were war-damaged buildings that needed to be rebuilt and ruined fortunes that made rebuilding seem impossible. And there were such deep emotional scars from the fear and carnage that had surrounded their homes that 50 years later, each detail could be recited word for word. But there were also nearly 2,500 people who had been enslaved at the outset of war, 30% of the county's population, basking in their newfound freedom and learning to live as citizens alongside their former captors. Andrew James Redmond, who lived on the same corner in the village of Groveton through slavery in his youth and freedom into old age, stated that after the Emancipation Proclamation, I set up my own blacksmith shop and went to work. I felt like a man then, and as if I had something to work for. He lived just maybe 3/4 of a mile from us here at the tiny village of Groveton. The black community rejoiced at their children finally being allowed to receive an education, as they also mourned the children they had lost to the cruel institution of slavery and the family members who died without ever seeing the Freedom Day. For James Robinson, a freedman who had worked long for the freedom of his wife and children, the 13th Amendment meant that he no longer had to worry about his family being ripped apart, but the knowledge was bittersweet. His 2 oldest sons, James and Alfred, had been sold by their enslaver to a sugarcane plantation in New Orleans. Even after the war, Robinson would never see them again. This place is not simply open space destined for development, but an accumulation of the stories that built our nation and our community. Its value lies in more than dollar signs. This land is soaked with the blood of thousands, the tears of our ancestors, and the voices of those that some feel we should forget for the sake of money. Let this hallowed ground be a catalyst for addressing the sins of our past and the hope for our future. There is no substitute for standing in the place where history happened and letting its memories inspire us. How will our children and grandchildren ponder the cries of dying men, the events that ended human bondage in our country, and the hopes our ancestors had for our future over the hum of data centers and the backdrop of industrial buildings? Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. Powerful, powerful stuff. Our next speaker, super excited to have Nathan Grayson join us. He's joining us from Carver Road, a descendant of Carver Road community. Thanks, Nathan.
Hello, everyone. As he said, my name is Nathan Grayson. I'm from the Carver Road area. Actually, I'm a descendant of Miss Sally Grayson, which is a young lady that was able to purchase the piece of property that I'm actually still living on right to this day for about $100 in the 1800s. And I'd imagine it would have taken her a long, long, long time to achieve $100. And then to be able to have the opportunity to purchase the land and to be honored in the state of Virginia as some of the first families to actually receive and have a deed to say that you are a landowner. Now, saying that, we were in saying that we were sent to a certain area which was considered a settlement. And those folks took that land and they worked it and they brought it up to a prosperous area and considered, I've heard rumors of it being considered as a Black Wall Street. We had people there that did house cleaning. We had people there that did blacksmith work. We had bricklayers. We had carpenters. We had people that worked at the White House, people that served in the military. All of that spawned from the Gainesville area that had to be an independent area because it was a dedicated zone for you to be in. So you couldn't step outside that realm to go get a cow. You had to wait until you got a cow from your neighbor. You couldn't go outside that zone to go and get sugar. You had to wait until you were able to be able to barter with someone within the community to work and thrive off of your community. In saying that, I have watched Gainesville turn into one of the most thriving communities. It has brought some beautiful people into my life. But in saying that, we have a large percentage of land that is being totally desiccated and destroyed at this point in time, and it's not for people. It has nothing to do with the people. Everyone that I know and love comes to Gainesville because Gainesville is a beautiful place to be. It's a beautiful place to walk across. It's a beautiful place to live. It's a beautiful place to raise your children. But at this point in given time, it seems as though our officials that are their hierarchy are looking with a different method. And if you're not a data center, you're not considered worthwhile in Prince William County anymore. They want to put a building on every square inch of this area. And I can't understand as to how we're in this situation ongoing. This has started back when I first got my house inherited from my parents that have passed away. God bless their souls. Idella Grayson and Ray Fitzhugh have surpassed from this world. And they left me with this home that I have to be able to cherish, to walk outside and walk in my grass and stand in my yard and look at my trees. But I look across the street and I see the future. McGraw's Corner Drive. I go to Haymarket, I look across from Walmart, I see a data center. I come down Route 29, I see a data center. I am a rabbit hunter. Everywhere I go, I walk. I preserve the land. I do not destroy it in any way. I do not trash it in any way. I make sure I protect it. When a landowner gives me the opportunity to stand and walk across their land, I deeply appreciate that. To allow me to utilize your turf, your ground, your space is a deep, deep thought that has to come from within. And I'm running out of areas at this point in time because every time I turn around, it's being developed. It's being put a house on, it's being put another piece of turf is being flipped over and destroyed here in Northern Virginia. We have no more Gossams Hardware, we have no more Fields Market, we have no more Arlington Ironworks, we have no more. Gainesville is a circular asphalt cart path. That's all it is, up and into the shopping center, up and over into the mall, up and over into the wherever. And no one has really realized what was originally there. Most of the folks that drive across that asphalt has no idea of how hard the folks worked that were in this area to maintain their land. But at this point in time, that's gone. And it's moving on very, very quickly unless we can figure out some kind of way to get the folks that are in control to consider, just consider, allowing us to enjoy our land. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts. Our last speaker this afternoon is a man I've come to respect and get to know over the sort of the fight to preserve this area, and that is Frank Washington with the Coalition to Preserve Historic Thoroughfare. And without further ado, Frank.
I am very honored to be here today to speak once again on this very important subject. The environment and all these other things are very important to me. But primarily at this point in time for me is the history that I'm concerned with, the history that will be lost if what we see happening continues. Thoroughfare is a small community nestled in the Rural Crescent. It was established by my ancestors of freed slaves and Native Americans in the 1800s. I was born and raised in Thoroughfare. My parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents were born and raised there as well. My family's roots are deep within the historic Rural Crescent of this county, deeper than most residing in this county at this time. This week, as I drive through my town, I found that one of our cemeteries that had already been desecrated is now covered with a fire pit. This cemetery has already been bulldozed several times. It is a documented cemetery with the county. It is an historic cemetery that dates back to beyond the 1800s. No one has stepped in to do anything to help to prevent this from happening, so it has left the door open. When I left church about 3 Sundays ago and I drove by and looked over to the right-hand side and saw an orange fence that now surrounds the cemetery area with a large stone pit in the center with a fire burning from it. I can't imagine or can't begin to tell you what went through my heart and went through my mind at that time. This is all being done in the name of greed and power, a sense of privilege, with the purpose of erasing the history of Black lives within those graves, our lives and presence from that town, both the dead and the living. This has been allowed despite laws and codes within the county and state that make this a civil and criminal offense that these laws are supposedly to protect us from. If this can happen to a documented cemetery and other grave site within our acknowledged historic talent as Thoroughfare, imagine what is in store for the history of Pageland. We all need to be keenly aware of the importance of what will be lost with this digital gateway project simply to fulfill the financial endeavors of a select few. An historic area where freed slave, and Native American grave sites are scattered throughout. An area where communities of color built homes and settled during the Reconstruction period. Pageland is an area where many families of color built several settlements and communities connected to Thoroughfare, the Gainesville settlement, and the Olive Branch Church and Haymarket, many of which have family connections. These were close-knit, self-sustaining communities that thrived during a time when adversity followed their every step. Settlements known as Thornton, which existed on Pageland Road, and the Marble Hill Flatirons Corner settlement that existed in the area of Aldi Road, Marble Hill Lane, and Studley Road adjacent to and through Pageland. These areas of post-Civil War African American communities in such proximity to a national battlefield park also presents a unique rural and cultural landscape that tells the story of one of the most significant periods in American history. The Civil War, Reconstruction, and the formation of African American communities that developed during the post-Civil War era, communities that helped build this county of Prince William. The Pennsylvania plantation also stretched along Pageland and was owned by the same family as the Cloverland plantation in Thoroughfare. This entire area of Pageland was once considered a forsaken land by the plantation owners. So it was allotted to freed slaves who first rented in the area, and then they bought. Just as with Thoroughfare, they built thriving communities throughout. The Thornton Elliott School that once stood on the corner of Thornton Lane and Pageland is where many people of color had the opportunity to learn to read and write freely for the first time. A short distance from this school, Mount Calvary still stands as it has since the 1800s, a church which was the heart of the Pageland communities of color, a church founded by Jenny Dean. Jenny Dean was born a slave on the Pennsylvania plantation here in Pageland. After the war, she and her family settled and built their home on the very land that once held them captive, but now offered them freedom. Her dream and education was nurtured on Pageland. In short, she had a dream to build an industrial school where children of color could learn a trade to better their lives. Despite much opposition, she succeeded, and the Manassas Industrial School was built and it thrived. Many years later, it was turned into a middle school and then an elementary school. That school still stands in Manassas to this day. Jenny Dean was a major influence in various post-Reconstruction communities throughout Prince William County and beyond. She and her family are buried at the Mount Calvary Church. I have provided a preliminary investigation into the history of Pageland. I have given various census records dating back to the 1800s that clearly documents and identifies a vast amount of people of color living within Pageland. Copies of maps that show various slave and free slave cemeteries throughout Pageland as well. Because of the plantation that existed, you without a doubt have numerous areas of graves yet to be identified, just as we have found in Thoroughfare. People of color were not afforded documentation for their burials. They were not afforded engraved headstones. Many were not even afforded last names. So they were buried on grassy knolls along fence lines or sometimes under trees that held some personal significance to the slaves or freed slaves. Field stones historically marked their grave sites. I have several documents that list hundreds and hundreds of slave names associated with the plantation here on Pageland. That, along with the census records provided, gives you a glimpse into how significant Pageland is to our historical story of perseverance and overcoming. It is a story that should be elevated, not erased to feed the greed of a select few. It is a story that should be used to bring a balance of our history for those who are suddenly claiming to be so concerned with what they feel the battlefield stands for. The battlefield is our collective history, just as Pageland is our collective history. Pageland gives us an Pageland also gives us an opportunity to bring light and a voice to a significant part of our African American history of this county and of our country. As the discussion and debates continue over the data centers and preservation of Pageland, I continually hear and see messages from a select few who are promoting the gateway using race to justify their actions. A select few who stand to gain millions as this project proceeds, and a board of our leaders who are seemingly playing into this. Suddenly, they are labeling the people trying to preserve their environment and our county's history and our natural resources as racist. They are suddenly attacking the battlefield, stating that it glorifies the Confederacy, using their ill-founded concern for exclusionary zoning as a tool to convince us that there is no real threat to the historical African-American assets along Pageland. They want us to believe their actions are about eliminating racist zoning and building inclusion while attempting to pit one side of the county against the other. These people, I assure you, are not exposing racist zoning or glorification of the Confederacy in our county. They only are creating a division to further their own personal gain, a division that they will reap benefits from. These landowners were not concerned with our struggles or our community or our quality of life prior to this opportunity to make millions. In reality, I believe they still are not. Now they are quoting Martin Luther King Jr. and spending untold sums of a mailer featuring a young black girl front and center flying a kite. All of this in order to build support among the black community, wanting us to believe that this data center will greatly benefit people of color. I find this hypocrisy staggering. How many times has a scenario of benefits such as this been promised to people of color? They want us to believe that they are concerned with the plight of people of color, yet some of these very people are allowing a widespread county destruction of the history of these very people of color. A history, as I stated earlier, that was integral to the building of this county and our country. A collective history that could be uplifted and used to bring balance to the history of the battlefield if they were truly concerned. It will tell a complete and accurate history that reflects a diverse set of experiences that ties us all together. A shared history that highlights the lives and stories of the black settlements that existed along Pageland and throughout Prince William County. This brings us together, and this opens the door of hope for true change. A few months ago, I was watching a movie, and I want to preface this by saying that I'm not pointing a finger at anyone standing here today or anyone else. But in this movie, as I was watching, there was a scene of a plantation. And on this plantation, there was a party going on. Everyone was dressed in white. There was a band playing. There was a table full of all types of food. And in the background, you could see the slaves out in the fields. At one point, one of the foremen brought in a black slave, hands tied behind his back, and he walked up and he whispered to the plantation owner. The plantation owner had him go to a tree and tie him by his hands to hang from a limb. He then told him to go out into the field and bring in all of the slaves and stand them around that tree. As they stood around that tree, they lit him on fire and forced him to stand there to watch as this was going on. What caught me the most is the fact that while he was burning on that tree, they went back to their party. They started playing the music again. They started eating and laughing and drinking. When I drove by the cemetery recently and saw that fire burning on the graves, near the graves of my ancestors and my family, I can't tell you what it did to my heart. I can't tell you what it did to my soul and to my spirit. The mentality is what caught me. The mentality that still exists. I'm not saying that everyone is a racist, but I am saying there is a system of racism that is alive and well that allows these things to continue in a different form. I personally don't believe that anyone here should feel guilty for anything that happened before we were born. I don't believe you're not responsible for it. We were not there. We did not exist. But what I do feel is that you need to be able to have a sense of empathy for what happened during that time. I want you to be able to look at me and see yourself in my eyes, see the pain that I feel still, not because I'm holding on to racist views, but because to this day we're still being attacked. We're still having our land taken from us. We're even in death. People aren't allowed to rest in peace. People who struggled so much, even here along Pageland, you have lives, people that struggled, Confederate, Union, black soldiers as well. It weren't just white soldiers fighting this war. There were black soldiers as well. And even though the Confederacy didn't have black soldiers fighting, they had servants that were there to help feed them and to cook their food and to carry their equipment. They also shed their lives on this ground as well. So this ground is soaked with blood of every single race, of both Confederate and Union, and it makes it important to all of us. This is truly our collective history. Thoroughfare is an example of what is in store for Pageland at this particular point in time. And what infuriates me the most is the fact that we have a board that is primarily of black supervisors. If anyone should empathize with what is going on right now, it should be them. If anyone should be voicing an opinion or standing against what we see happening now, it should be those particular board members. We all should be, but they especially should be. How can anyone sit back and condone the fact that a cemetery now has a fire pit burning over top of it? It's been over 2 years that we've been fighting for our ancestors in Thoroughfare to rest in peace and give them respect and value that many did not have in life. And now it's even being stolen in death. A dignity they deserve, a place of well-deserved peace and honor. Even in death, after all they have endured to pave the way for us, the bodies that are scattered in graves and cemeteries throughout Pageland and Thoroughfare are still fighting for respect and equality, except now we are their voices. Hundreds of years later, they are still being told they are worthless and without value. That is exactly what we're being told in Thoroughfare, that we are worthless and without value, that they have the power over us. They have power to dictate who we are, who we say we are, who we want to be. You know, they have the power to take away and to erase our history as if we never existed. We're being told the same thing as they were told hundreds of years ago. We have no value. Pageland is an opportunity for us to stand up and to fight, all of us, black, white, I don't care religion. It's not about politics. This is about human decency. It's about a common good that should be alive within all of us. What is this county coming to if we can allow such atrocities continue to happen against a people that we all can agree has already suffered so much and still is suffering to this day, not because we're trying to hold on to the past, but because we're not allowed to let go of the past because of what we see happening right now here in Pageland. Once this is gone, it is gone. That history cannot be brought back. And it's up to us to make that difference, to make that change, because if we don't do it now, it's going to be too late. I thank you for this opportunity and ask God bless you all.
It would be rather hard to follow that, so I think it's a good thing that we're going to end on Frank today. This proposal still has the opportunity to be halted. The damage hasn't been done. The ground hasn't been disturbed. Those bodies haven't been dug up. The county has the opportunity to get this right. Next Tuesday, on November 1st, the Board of Supervisors at 7:30 in the evening will hear this issue. They will hear from county staff, and then they will hear from us, from the community, from the nonprofit organizations that have fought this, and from people like you. And we can only hope that after they've heard all of these facts, that they've heard this opposition, that they do the right thing and protect this very important and special area. I want everybody, before you leave today, to sort of look around and take in this battlefield and take in the historic resources. It's truly a special place. I have come to be very familiar with Manassas, and it holds a very special place in my heart. And of course, we once again call on the Board of Supervisors to reject the digital gateway and to preserve this area forever. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask everyone to go and fill out a postcard, take an action, email the board, call the board, tell them you oppose this project. It is not too late to stop this train. Ashley asked me to recognize Supervisor Janine Lawson, who is here, who has been a champion on this issue. So thank you, Janine, for being here. If anybody is interested, come talk to us after this. Happy to answer any questions. And Ashley, are we still wanting to do a hike, or are we going to wrap it up? I don't really know what the schedule is.
That's kind of up to you.
If folks are interested, I was planning to walk sort of one last time on the battlefield before this vote, to take a look at the landscape one last time, to walk towards sort of the National Park Service boundary. Okay. And Ashley, thankfully for whispering in my ear, Supervisor Margaret Franklin is also here. Thank you for being here, Supervisor. We appreciate your support. I think on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I appreciate everybody coming. Please take an action, and if you want to talk to us or go on a walk after this, we'd love to have you. Thank you to all of our speakers for being here today. Could not have done this without y'all. Thanks, everybody.